Evening, everybody. Welcome to another monthly program of the Rhinebeck Historical Society. My name is Mike Frazier, and I'm delighted to have all of you here. Before I introduce our two speakers for this evening, I have to acknowledge and thank a donor who made a gift without which we would not have been able to present this program this evening, a gift of the Bartlett prints and many other prints as well. And that donor is Sue Hartshorn. And Sue, thank you so much. And we thank Sue not only for the gift of those prints that served as a basis of this evening's program, but Sue, I should point out that we're broadcasting this evening from the Star Library, and Sue was a longtime board president of the Star Library Board. So thank you a second time, Sue. So at this point, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our two speakers, David Miller and Bonnie Wood.
Good evening, everyone. We want to, on behalf of the Rhinebeck Historical Society, we welcome you to the local history room here at the Star Library. Behind us, you see our collection of local history books and the door to the archives room. It's here that we scan the beautiful prints that you'll be seeing this evening.
Hi, great to see you all. We've arranged Sue Hartshorn's prints from New York Bay to Albany and beyond to create a historic trip up the Hudson. Our objective this evening is to present a historic trip up the Hudson on a steamship. We will make stops at the location of each of the 34 prints donated, and we will provide historic details and background for each print. All aboard! Time to embark. Sit back and enjoy the view. Our trip planning begins with a view of the map, a little background information, and then the adventure begins. Let the 34 images speak to you. What stories they will tell. Part 1, the red line 1880 map is our route from New York to Albany and beyond. Beginning at number 1, New York Bay, we will continue with stops at number 2, the Ferry at Brooklyn, number 3, the Narrows, number 4 and 5, Fulton Market in Manhattan, number 6, the Palisades, and ending with number 7, the village of Sing Sing. Since most of the donated prints were included in the book American Scenery, written by N.P. Willis and illustrated by W.H. Bartlett, I will begin with a little background on Willis and Bartlett. Let's begin with the artist. Who was W.H. Bartlett? He was an Englishman sent by a publisher to sketch specifically for American Scenery, the book. The easily identifiable sites make his prints historically significant. Who was N.P. Willis? He was the editor and writer of American Scenery. With his co-editor, George Pope Morris, on January 29th of 1845, he published an advance copy of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, first publication of the poem with Poe's name. What a coup. He co-founded the National Press, which eventually became the Town and Country magazine that we know today. Perhaps you have it on your coffee table this evening. Let's give a shout out to Jane Harkinson, volunteer at the Cornwall Historical Society Museum. Willis is known for renaming Storm King Mountain of the Hudson Highlands. When Willis heard the owner of the land, pictured here, call it an Idlewild. We're looking at this Idlewild here. What an image, of which nothing could ever be made. He knew Idlewild was the perfect name. Architect Calvert Vaux. Yes, Calvert Vaux. Included in the cottage Idlewild. Villas and Cottages, his book. Of course, this is one of the sample cottages. Now, this building is a one-story brick ranch house on Idlewild Park Drive in Cornwall.
If you made this trip 100 or more years ago, you have been on a steamship like the Albany pictured here. The graceful steamer was built for the day line in 1880. Originally, she had the traditional round paddle wheel covers. By the time of this photo, she features a more streamlined appearance. The passage from New York City to Albany generally took from 2 to 5 days, depending on how many stops they made. The fare ranged from $6 to $10. So let's get started on the journey. Print number 1. You're looking at Fort Wadsworth in the upper left on Staten Island, built in the early 1800s, and Brooklyn on the right. In the center of the print, you can see Manhattan off in the distance. Since Samuel Morse invented the telegraph in the 1830s, this telegraph pole could have been one of the first lines that connected Staten Island to the city. From this angle, you cannot see the lighthouse, which I'll show you in a minute. First, let's look at the map of New York Bay. We see Fort Wadsworth and its lighthouse marked with a blue A, and Robbins Reef Lighthouse with a blue B. So, between the two lighthouses, the entrance to Kill Von Kull was protected. This channel has always been a heavily used waterway because it supports all the ship traffic between New York and Newark Bay. And you can see Liberty Island in the center of the map with the red circle. I wanted to show you a closer view of the two lighthouses. You can see the top of the 1803 lighthouse on Fort Wadsworth in the center of the image with the flag on top. Here's a print of Robbins Reef Lighthouse on the north side of the Kill. Robbins Reef was built in 1839, and where New York inspiration Kate Walker heard and followed her dying husband's words, "Mind the light, Kate." Now, the primary historical significance of Robbins Reef lies in her story. She did mind the lighthouse for 33 years after Captain Walker died of pneumonia in 1890. She earned an annual salary of $600, which she received once a year when an official dropped off her supply of coal and barrels of oil for the light. Tending to the light was arduous. It had to be lit each night immediately following the gunfire from Governor's Island, which signaled sunset. Until dawn, it would blink every 6 seconds. On a clear night, it could be seen from 12 miles away. Image number 2 shows a steam ferry coming into Brooklyn with Manhattan in the background. In the 1600s and 1700s, the ferries were powered by sail and oar. In 1776, George Washington escaped with his troops after losing the Battle of Long Island by moving his men across the river in such boats. However, in 1814, Robert Fulton, inventor of the world's first successful steamboat, established a steam-powered ferry like the one you see here. It was used to traverse the river between Fulton Street in Brooklyn and Fulton Street in Manhattan. Fulton's steam ferry sparked an era of rapid growth in Brooklyn. The ferry business would slowly decline after the Brooklyn Bridge opened in 1883. Here's an image from 1913 of the Brooklyn Ferry Terminal on the left side of the bridge. Today, they've restored some ferry service from the Brooklyn Ferry Terminal to various points in Manhattan.
Number 3 is the Narrows. Now, in addition to A for Fort Wadsworth and B for Robbins Reef, C marks the location of Fort Hamilton and D, Fort Lafayette. These are strategic locations played a critical role securing our safety. Let's view the beauty, the ships, the buildings, the land, and the beautifully attired people. Imagine a lazy Sunday afternoon stroll. Now, we contrast this with a description from Robert Jewett's journal in 1609. Robert Jewett was Hendrik Hudson's mate on the Half Moon. Robert Jewett wrote, quote, "They were clothed in mantles of feathers and robes of fur, the women clothed in hemp, red copper tobacco pipes, and other things of copper they did wear about their necks." Is that a flag at half-mast? We do not know why. Fort Hamilton is there on the right of the print, and Fort Lafayette is on an island in the middle of the river. Fort Hamilton had two missions in 1831. The first was to support actions against enemy warships. The second was to defend against land-based attacks. At our stop here, we can view the forts and contrast that with the beautiful scenery on the shore, right here in the front of the print. Print number 4 was published in Harper's Weekly in 1882, and number 5 is the attached article. We are not focused on the Big Apple, but the Big Oyster. Lenape harvested oysters. In the Big Oyster, History on the Half Shell, author Mark Kurlansky claims, quote, "The history of New York oysters is the history of New York itself," unquote. We're going to go over the image now. Number 1, on the top left, you can view a harvester dredging through the ice. Number 2, top center, is an oyster shell covered with young. Number 3, dredging from a boat would seem to be a little more precarious than dredging from shore. Number 4, you see the drumfish. Number 5 depicts the cold and slippery task of opening oysters for export. Number 6, look above to see a row of sharp oyster knives. 7, the starfish. 8, the dredge. 9, you can see young oysters. And 10, my favorite of these vignettes, depicts oyster sloops in the foreground and city buildings behind at the foot of West 10th Street. Historically, whether by the ancient Romans or Native Americans, the Lenape oysters were not considered just a delicacy for the upper class, but a staple food for all. We return back to Robert Jewett's journal on the Half Moon, September 13th, 1609, where Jewett described the Lenape on board the Half Moon, who, quote, "brought with them oysters and beans, whereof we bought some." What a great documentation of the purchase of oysters in the 17th century. The image portrays the retail trade, which once started, became a great success.
Palisades on the western bank of the Hudson stretches from Jersey City to just below Nyack. In the center of the map, you can read the name Palisades from bottom to top. It's across the river from Yonkers. Number 6 is a print of the Palisades. Bartlett did a nice job showing how the 500-foot high cliffs dwarf the steamer and the sailing ships down on the water. These cliffs show the power of the planet as it forced molten lava up into this formation. It's one of the best examples of this kind of columnar structure in the United States. The park was opened in 1904 as a result of public outcry against the sharp increase of quarrying activity on the cliffs after the Civil War. The park has miles of trail that run along the top edge of the cliff with great views of the river. There's also a wonderful trail that runs along the water's edge. At the center of the map, you can see the village of Sing Sing between Tarrytown and Croton. It's the final stop on our first segment of the Dayline map. In number 7, you see the small village of Sing Sing, which was incorporated in 1813, jutting out into the river. Sing Sing is a maximum security prison opened in 1826, replacing the Newgate prison that was located down in the city. In 1845, the New York State Legislature created a new town out of the northern part of Mount Pleasant. A local Native American authority suggested the town be named Ossining, which is a different form of the name Sing Sing. Here's an aerial view of the prison 100 years ago. Inmates always said how cold it was being right out on the river. And you pass the prison every time you travel down to the city on a train, and you look up at the ominous barbed wire and the guard towers.
We're at part 2 of our journey. Beginning at number 8 and 9 in Peekskill, we will continue with stops at number 10, West Point, 11, Cold Spring, 12 and 13, the Hudson Highlands, 14, Newburgh, a longer stop at 15 to 18 in Poughkeepsie, number 19, Hyde Park, and 20, the beautiful Esopus Lighthouse.
On the map, the red circles 8 and 9 show Caldwell's Landing on the west side of the river and Peekskill to the east. The blue box shows Jones Point at the foot of Dunderberg Mountain. This beautiful print with the lighthouse on top of the mountain, which is very unusual since most lighthouses are in or on the river. You can see sailing ships and a steamboat passing by. Behind the lighthouse, you can see Dunderberg Mountain. Starting at this point, you enter the Hudson Highlands with many mountains like Anthony's Nose and Breakneck Ridge towering over 1,000 feet above the river. Caldwell's Landing was the first place that steamboats stopped on their way up to Albany. In 1846, the Hudson River Reserve Fleet, widely known as Mothball Fleet, was moved from Tarrytown north to Jones Point. At its peak, it had 189 ships in July of 1965. Several viewing points were established along 9W for the hundreds of motorists who stopped by daily to look at the ships. 3 of them were my parents and myself. Number 9 is also viewed from Peekskill, looking at Dunderberg Mountain across the river. In the foreground, you can see the beginnings of the city of Peekskill on the waterfront. Again, in September 1609, Henry Hudson anchored at Peekskill. An entry was made in the ship's log that, quote, "It will be a very pleasant place to build a town," unquote. It was established as a village in 1816, incorporated as a city in 1940. The area was an early American industrial center, primarily for iron plow and stove products. It was the home of the Viney and Smith Company, now known as Crayola LLC. It's great to know that our crayons came from Peekskill. In this postcard, you're looking north from Peekskill. This place is called the Narrows because once you head north to Bear Mountain, the river enters one of its narrowest parts. Many decades later, you'll be looking at the Bear Mountain Ridge traversing the river.
Traveling further north, we stop at number 10 West Point, then number 11 Cold Spring. What a beautiful image. The view from West Point, looking from Trophy Point up the Hudson. Constitution Island is on the right, and Bannerman's Island is in the distance. Let's stop to appreciate this view of the mountains and the sailboats on the river. See the still waters protected by the heightened banks beneath the calm sky. This aerial view of West Point's historic buildings demonstrates the harmony of the Academy structures with the surrounding natural environment. Wow, what a fun photo. Dwight David Eisenhower kicks a football at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, New York, 1912. He entered West Point in June of 1911 and graduated in June of 1915. This collection was compiled by Mamie Dowd Eisenhower. Here we have the home of New York State militiaman, General George P. Morris. Now, of course, we heard about him in the beginning of the presentation because he is the co-founder and friend of N.P. Willis, who founded Town and Country magazine. Imagine in 1840, this is a steamboat stop. We would climb through the forested area that is beneath the mansion on the right to emerge in front of General Morris's stately mansion. We might meet author Edgar Allan Poe and artists from the Hudson River School. We might hear world-renowned opera singer Madame Anna Bishop singing, quote, "Down by the riverside I stray." We might hear discussions about the environment in the Hudson River, or an early protest song, "Woodman, Spare That Tree," still quoted today. Both songs were written by Morris. Morris preceded environmentalist Pete Seeger and his support of the Hudson River. We move now to Crow Nest from Bull Hill. We are looking directly at Crow Nest, considered to be one of the most beautifully shaped mountains in America. Once again, back to General George P. Morris, who describes Crow Nest with these words, quote, "And Crow Nest like a monarch stands, crowned with a single star," unquote.
Next image, painted from the Newburgh side of the river, is looking at what is now Hudson Highlands State Park. The blue F marks the word breakneck. Image number 13, entrance to the Hudson Highlands near Newburgh. The large mountain on the right is Breakneck Ridge, several miles south of Beacon. At 1,260 feet, it's one of the high mountains along the Hudson. It got its name because it is a difficult climb, and you could, indeed, break your neck trying to do so. Here's a photo taken from Breakneck Ridge looking south down at the river. The ridge is now part of a state park, a mostly undeveloped preserve of over 8,000 acres with over 70 miles of trails called Hudson Highlands State Park Preserve, running from Beacon down to Peekskill. Number 14 is a view from Ruggles' house in Newburgh. The house was high on the hill overlooking the Newburgh waterfront. But today we have, again, you're looking at Breakneck Ridge on the east side of the river. This view has been painted many times, and here's another print of it. So who was Ruggles? Mr. Ruggles was for many years a leading member of the Orange County Bar. He was admitted to the bar in 1810 and continued an active practice until he was appointed general law agent to the New York and Erie Railroad Company. David Ruggles was an ardent promoter of the railroad linking Newburgh with the Pennsylvania coal fields. Now, the next four prints you're going to see are all located in Poughkeepsie. Number 15 is a western view of Poughkeepsie. According to Bill Jeffway, Executive Director of the Dutchess County Historical Society, College Hill in the upper left was a preparatory school not related to Vassar. FDR's father went to this very prestigious school, which was built in 1836. The yellow church in the upper center is the old Dutch Reformed Church. In the lower right, down on the water, is the Exchange Hotel at Steamboat Landing. This was one of the main stops on the day line and the place you would be spending your night. Also in the lower center is Vassar Brewery. Here's a closer picture of the brewery on the river. In 1801, James Vassar brewed ale with barley grown in his farm. Business was so good that by 1814, his brother opened a much larger brewery, Matthew Vassar and Company, on the river. At the time, Matthew's brewery was the largest one of its kind in the United States.
We have another shout out to Bill Jeffway for identifying the courthouse. The building at the left of the center is the county courthouse on the southwest corner of Main and Market Streets. If we were to stroll up Main Street in the mid-1800s to view the side of the courthouse, the press office, and perhaps we might even visit the daguerreotype artist for a memento of our historical trip. Let's give a quick shout out to Shannon Butler, historian for the Poughkeepsie Public Library District, for providing permission to use several images for this presentation. She recommends viewing an exhibit on the second floor of the current courthouse for more information. The courthouse has always been in this same location. We are now viewing the third Dutchess County Courthouse, which was built after the previous one was destroyed by fire in 1806. It's demolished in 1902. FDR, yes, FDR believed that the Poughkeepsie Post Office should resemble the old courthouse. This mural of the courthouse, painted in the Poughkeepsie Post Office, happened in 1940. Here are FDR's words at the dedication of the Poughkeepsie Post Office. FDR said, quote, "Yes, I am glad to be here with my neighbors on this 250th anniversary of the founding of Poughkeepsie and on the 150th year of the signing of the Constitution of the United States. I think always of Dutchess County and its county seat as a very close part of my life. And although I am temporarily resident elsewhere, I get back here, as you know, just as often as public business will let me. And I am going to keep on coming back and being your neighbor," unquote. We move now to the middle of the Hudson River with Josh Ward and James Hamill. The Champion Scholar of America title was returned to former champion Josh Ward after losing to Pennsylvania native James Hamill in 2 successive matches on the Schuylkill in September 1862. This image was from a newspaper article. There were 9 Ward brothers who competed against each other. The strongest 4 won many titles. Josh, strongest performer, was a coach after competing. Ellis Ward was a coach at UPenn. Imagine you are sitting here with feet mounted and ready to compete on the Hudson River. Your inner focus is on the rowing, the wind's blowing, the water splashing, you against the elements. The regatta in 1890, this is the original skull now on loan to the Hudson River Maritime Museum in Kingston. It was loaned by Cornwall-on-Hudson. I zoomed in here so you could see this in this photo I took just a few weeks ago. but you can see this skull. It hangs very high on the wall, very close to the ceiling, and it's difficult to get the whole skull, of course, because of the length. And certainly this would be a better way for you to actually see the aging and the beauty of the use. So you can see the use of this skull. And today, the walkway over the Hudson is a premier scenic location. At its peak, 3,500 rail cars cross the bridge each day. And of course, this article is in Scientific American. It's a very interesting article about the bridge. But we're going to imagine now, we're going to go back at this same site. Let's imagine that we travel back in time through the centuries. The bridge was built in the late 1800s. Go back to the 1700s, during the Palatine settlement, the Revolutionary War. Further back to 1609, when Henry Hudson sailed into the Hudson Valley, and even further back to Native Americans, the Lenape, the Mohicans, and the Mohawk, who populated this region.
Number 19 is in Hyde Park. It paints a very bucolic image of the people sitting on the hills above the river, sailboats on the water, and the Catskills off in the distance. Dr. John Bard, an eminent New York City doctor, bought the land on the east side of Kings Highway, near where St. James Church is now located. He continued purchasing land until he owned all of the Hyde Park patent. His son, Dr. Samuel Bard, was also an outstanding New York City physician. After George Washington was inaugurated president, he asked Dr. Samuel Bard to operate on a growth on his leg, which he did, assisted by his father. George Washington lived for 10 more years after this and gave Dr. Samuel Bard credit for saving his life. Number 20, the Esopus Lighthouse is located in the middle of the Hudson at the bend in the river just across from Statsburg. You can see it on the map marked with a red circle. The blue A marks the location of the Rondout Lighthouse further north. The Esopus Lighthouse was built in 1871 to warn river traffic to steer clear of this shallow section of the river. At low tide from the Ulster shore out to the middle of the river is only 2 feet deep. Lots of green grows in the shallow bottom, making it a favorite hiding and feeding place for fish. That's why it's called the Soapus Meadows, even though it's underwater. Today, it's the only wooden lighthouse left on the Hudson River. It's maintained by the Esopus Meadows Lighthouse, not for profit, and you can tour this restored lighthouse. Going only a few miles north, we'll see another lighthouse on the Kingston side, the Rondout Lighthouse. This picture shows the lighthouse that was built in 1867 of local bluestone, and this is the one that you see from the train station. The lighthouse was needed because the Rondout Creek developed into the most important shipping center on the river between New York City and Albany. This followed the opening of the Delaware and Hudson Canal in 1828. It was constructed privately to bring coal from Pennsylvania to New York markets. The canal terminated at the creek and quickly made the Rondout one of the largest coal storage depots in the East. By the 1860s, the Thomas Cornell Steamboat Company had over 60 towing vessels operating out of the creek. In 2002, the Coast Guard transferred ownership to the city of Kingston and eventually to the Hudson River Maritime Museum. The bell was removed from the lighthouse when it was decommissioned, and if you want to see the bell, you can see it inside the graveyard of the Rhinebeck Reformed Church.
Part 3 of our journey takes us further north and at the highest portion of our 1880 map. Beginning at number 21 and 22 in Rhinebeck, We will continue with stops at 23 through 25 with a view at ice yachting in the Hudson. 26 is Catskill and 27 Catskill in the home territory of Thomas Cole, father of the Hudson River School of Landscape Painters. 28 is Hudson and 29 Albany, which became the capital of New York State in 1797. Donated prints number 21 and 22 are 2 pages in the book Historical Collections of the State of New York. The Academy no longer stands, but you can view a brick Methodist church with a historical marker for the grave sites of Reverend Garretson and his wife, a Livingston on East Market Street. The earlier image, Western View of Poughkeepsie, is also a page in the same historic book. We have arrived at Rhinebeck. Imagine a stop at Schultz's Landing, just south of where the Kingston-Rhinecliff Bridge now stands. We travel east to Upper Hook, then Hook Road. We join Old Post Road, where open fields now stand in place of farmhouses that once dotted the area. We're soon approaching the historic village of Rhinebeck. Here we can stroll along Market Street and adjoining streets to view 19th century buildings that provide a glimpse today of what once was. Now we have to return back to the steamship to continue our tour.
Prints number 23, 24, and 25 are from Harper's Weekly in the late 1800s. These times were much a colder period than we have today, where ice harvesting, ice fishing, and ice yachting were all possible. They were basically sailboats, except they had ski-like supports under the yacht, which you can see in the print, and they could skate really fast across the ice. In the other 2 prints, you could see more ice yachts out on the river. They would engage both in yacht races and speed trials. When the wind would catch the sail, they would fly. You had to tack from right to left and back again as if you were on a regular sailboat. John Aspinwall Roosevelt, FDR's uncle, was the first Commodore of the Hudson River Ice Yacht Club, founded in 1885 at Poughkeepsie. This prestigious yacht, called the Icicle, required a railway flat car to transport because it was 67 feet long and carried over 1,000 feet of canvas. Nearly 140 years later, it's still recognized by the Guinness Book of Records as the largest ice boat ever built. In 1871, it beat the Chicago Express train on a run between Poughkeepsie and Ossining because the yachts could reach speeds of up to 75 miles an hour. This version of the Icicle was built largely for bragging rights. It was not allowed to race officially due to its non-regulation size. So John built a smaller version of the Icicle, 50 feet in length. With this yacht, John was able to win the Ice Yacht Challenge Pennant of America 4 times, and you can see the Icicle at the Hudson River Maritime Museum in Kingston. Lastly, the Ice Yacht Hawk was presented to FDR by his mother as a Christmas gift in 1901. FDR, seen here, sailed and raced the Hawk on the Hudson River, chiefly during the years he was a student at Harvard. Iceboating declined in popularity after the turn of the 19th century. Icebreakers supporting an increase in river traffic made it difficult to find open ice. And more recently, global warming has prevented the river from freezing. There are still a few events that take place in the rare times when the ice reaches 10 inches thick.
We have now arrived near the end of our journey. Number 26 is Catskill, and number 27 is Catskill. the land that inspired not only Thomas Cole and Frederick Church, but many more artists and poets. Here we have the luxurious mountain house. Initially, tourists would travel by Mr. Beach's stagecoach from Catskill Landing. He started to face competition from hotels closer to the river and decided to begin construction on an elevating railway to replace the stagecoach ride. Running from Otis Junction, where it connects with Catskill Mountain Railway, to the top of the mountain near Catskill Mountain House. It opened for freight and passenger traffic in 1892. Another Hudson Valley record, 19th century American engineering ingenuity, Otis Elevating Railway and the Poughkeepsie Railway Bridge mentioned earlier. This railway had the longest cable incline in the country at 7,000 feet in 1892. What a serene winter landscape. Cole's decision to board a steamship in New York City and travel to the Catskills not only changed his life, but the history of the Hudson River Valley as well. Now, consider this. Bartlett's chosen Hudson River scenes inspired many Hudson River School artists. The Laurel House. The competition for the mountain house is pictured here near Catskill Falls. Now we are near the end of our journey. We are 116 miles from New York, 29 miles from Albany, 60 feet above the level of the river, with a population of 5,672. We have arrived at the city of Hudson in 1846. Let's give a quick shout out to Paul Costa, reference librarian at the Hudson Library. In the middle, view the magnificent courthouse of marble and blue limestone. The buildings represent the focus of the residents in 1846. We have 8 churches, 5 hotels, 7 or 8 whale ships, 4 steamboats, and 2 public markets in Hudson in that year, 1846. Across the river, let's view Athens, stretched along the opposite bank. West Athens Hill, one of the oldest prehistoric archaeological sites in New York State, dating to circa 12,500 years ago, documents one of the earliest encampments of Native Americans at the end of the Ice Age. More information can be obtained from the New York State Museum site. Here we have Currier of Currier and Eyes. This image, of course, it's very quite a dramatic and tragic image that we're viewing here, depicting the wreck of the Steamboat Swallow. April 7th, 1845, steamship Swallow crashed on a small rocky island. This story was taken from American Guidebook, which was published in 1846. A part of steamship legend on the Hudson River, this crash. Casualties may have been as high as 45. Some of the newspaper reports differ as far as the number of casualties, and church bells in both Hudson and Athens tolled to spread the word of the help that was needed out on the river on that day.
Here we are at the very top of the map at the city of Albany. First, I have to thank Tony Opalka, Albany city historian, for helping interpret the images on this print. You're looking at Albany on print number 29 in the mid-1800s. You can see sailboats and a steamship headed back down to the city. You can see a lot of churches on the side of the hill. The most prominent one is the Pearl Street Baptist Church with the capital-like dome in the center top of the print. The building to its right at the top of the hill is the old City Hall, and the building to its right is the old state capitol, both designed by architect Philip Hooker. Here's another print which makes it easier to see the entrance to the Erie Canal. The row of buildings you see on the river in the center of the print enclose a basin at the mouth of the Erie Canal. If you look at the center of the picture, you can see ships sailing in and out of the entrance to the canal. Here's an image of Old City Hall. It was made of white marble and said to be the most beautiful building in the city. It burned in 1880 and was replaced on the same site by today's City Hall. The building to the right of City Hall is the state capitol, built in 1809, that stood on what now is the front lawn of the present Capitol building, which replaced it in 1899.
8 miles west of the Hudson River, 9 colleges, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Wesleyan, Dartmouth, Williams, Cornell, Trinity, and Princeton entered 6-man shells, over 25,000 fans at Lake Saratoga in 1874. The excitement then was rivaling that now at the Super Bowl, or maybe even March Madness. Columbia won. Bartlett sketched this same location, not with all the excitement of race day competition, but as wilderness rather than a tourist destination.
Print number 31 is the Bartlett print from 1839 of Glens Falls. It's 50 miles north of Albany on the river and beyond the top of our dayline map. A ship cannot travel this far because the river is unnavigable past Albany because of waterfalls and dams. There's a wooden bridge crossing the river with a stone column support. The large building is at the top is a mill. Using the power of the falling water, the first settlers established mills here in 1760s. At first, there were lumber mills and grist mills. Then, in the 1800s, came stone sawmills and the factories that made a variety of wooden products, including window sashes and blinds, and hubs and spokes for wagon wheels. Today, you can see the rocks and the remnants of the foundation of an old bridge like the one in the print. The waterfall is made of Glens Falls limestone, which is a hard black rock that resists the wearing action of water. Number 32 is a print of Little Falls from 1838. Now, Little Falls is 70 miles west of Albany on the Mohawk River. It flows east and enters the Hudson north of Albany. Because the Mohawk River also has rapids and waterfalls, they built the Erie Canal for river traffic. You can also see a railroad running alongside of the Mohawk River. On this Google map, you can see the falls on the right, the Mohawk River, and the Erie Canal below it. There's an interesting story about a train crash. On August 23rd, 1903, a westbound newspaper train of the New York Central Railroad derailed at Little Falls due to excessive speed on a curve. All 3 cars were loaded with New York City newspapers. The train was instructed to reduce speed at 3 locations, including Little Falls, but it failed to do so. The accident happened a half-mile east of the train station on the Gulf Curve, the sharpest curve of the New York Central system. The engineer and fireman were killed instantly. The 2 crew members that survived were the only occupants of the destroyed baggage car. They believe they survived only by being cushioned by the large bundles of newspaper. Here's a postcard of the Gulf Curve on the tracks as they enter Little Falls. You can see how sharp the curve is. And of course, there's always a chance for history to repeat itself. There was another crash in 1940 on a passenger train at the Gulf Curve, and unfortunately, 31 of the passengers were killed.
George Cannon Wales is known for his sketches of American ships. If you look closely, you can see the ship there at the bottom of the rocks, camouflaged a bit in this sketch. His ironbound appears in etchings and lithographs of American ships, a collector's item, and could be seen anywhere on our journey. Riviere du Hudson. We can disembark here onto the dock of a quaint village, possibly garrison. See a railway train? We turn around, look across the river. We can see West Point framed by the mountains. Artist J. Noel created this image, Riviere du Hudson, that captures the essence of what we might see on our historic trip up the Hudson.
Bonnie and I hope that you enjoyed the show tonight, and we're going to turn it back to Mike.